Hi everyone, welcome back. I wanted to do a reading update for today. So I'll start off with Imperium by Robert Harris. I mentioned this book last week. I've been reading through it. I've been going kind of slow. I was making progress earlier this week, but I've slowed down with Imperium. But I want to get through it definitely. I have this is part of a trilogy, and I checked out the other two from the library, so I want to get through these. This trilogy is about Cicero, and the first volume is about Cicero as a young senator, and he is taking on a powerful, corrupt governor of Sicily. Okay, in the book, who is Varus, a very powerful figure. Cicero is dealing with a lot of obstacles to take on this case, which could put his own life in danger dealing with someone so powerful. So, yeah, it's good so far. I should say this first novel, it's told from the point of view of Tiro, who was Cicero's secretary. So the book is told with this, I guess, fly on the wall perspective of someone who was there and witnessed all these things. But like I said, I'm enjoying it. I do want to pick up the pace a little bit on Imperium, though. So let's see. What else? I've had this for a while. This is a novelization of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the 1977 science fiction film. And this is a used copy, obviously, from a library from the Salt Lake County Library System. So I think this has been passed around quite a bit. But yeah, I read the novelization, and it has the author Steven Spielberg, and I believe this was ghostwritten by another writer. I looked it up, but they were doing this, I know, in the late 70s, putting the director's name on the novelizations. I know Star Wars did that as well with George Lucas. I think the Star Trek movie did that too with Gene Roddenberry. Roddenberry might have actually have written that novel. I'm not sure, but as for this, it's now Close Encounters is one of my favorite movies, and it was interesting to read the novelization. We do get a little bit more, and that's kind of the appeal of the novelizations, where you do get scenes that were left out of the movie, or we get some more dialogue that was maybe cut from scenes. So there's just nothing major, nothing big is like that was removed from the movie, but it's just a lot of the character nuances and things like that get included in the novelization, which was interesting to read. And yeah, other than that, though, it's pretty straightforward, the telling of the movie and everything. And like I said, it was interesting to just kind of get the movie from as a novel form. So that was another book I read. I also read a book I've read many times, Chronicles by Bob Dylan. This is his memoir, Dylan, published in 2004. Now, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. At one time, I was a big Bob Dylan fan. I went to a lot of shows, probably from 2008 to 2016. I went to about 12 Bob Dylan concerts. So I was really into him for a time. I had a blog. I still have a blog about Bob Dylan. I haven't written on it for a while, but I don't listen to Dylan as much as I used to, but I'll still listen fairly frequently. And like I said, I've read this book many times, and it's been a while since I've read it, and I always enjoy it. It's funny. It's I find it engaging and funny. It's interesting how the book is structured, where Dylan starts out with his early days in New York City, in the folk scene at Greenwich Village, and talks about a lot of the characters on the scene at the time, people he knew, but also about his struggle to become a songwriter and try to break into the folk scene, and that's really good. And then we jump ahead into 1970, where Dylan by that time has written all those iconic songs of the 1960s, and he was slowing down by 1970. He was married with a family. The pressures of the road and everything had taken their toll on Dylan in the mid 60s. Famously had a motorcycle accident in 1966, and he stopped touring for several years after that. So it is interesting. Dylan chose to write about this time in his life that's a little bit mysterious, and a lot of it is about Archibald MacLeish, the poet, who I've not read MacLeish's poetry, but he wanted Dylan to help collaborate on a play MacLeish was writing, and so it's interesting to get Dylan's engagement with literary figures, and Dylan writes a little bit about his disillusionment with the 1960s and the direction it took and everything. And then we jump ahead even further in time to the late 1980s when Dylan was at another struggle point in his career where he was no longer feeling inspired performing, and was considering just retiring from doing concerts in the late 80s, and then had a change of heart, decided that he was going to tour more, and kind of went through a creative resurgence in the later part of the decade. And a lot of that section is about Oh Mercy and his 1989 album he made, which is one of his better albums. And he, like I said, he went through a phase in the 80s that was, the material wasn't as great as before, and Oh Mercy was somewhat of a return to form. So that gives us insight into Dylan, how he worked in the recording studio, his relationship with his producer and the musicians, and even into his songwriting process a little bit. And then for the final section, the book circles back to the 1960s again, where Dylan gets back into his early evolution as a songwriter, like what influenced him and how his concern about being too, not wanting just to mimic his influences, like Woody Guthrie being the most famous one, but how does he find his own voice as a songwriter in the midst of all the other folk singing going on, but also trying to use his influences but transcend them at the same time, which is interesting too. And I think the book is almost more interesting too for what he leaves out. I mean, there's nothing in here about all those albums he did in the 1960s, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, all those. Nothing on the 70s really, when he was doing Blood on the Tracks and doing so much in the 70s. So it's interesting how he structured it at these different, I guess, flashpoints in his career and things like that. You kind of walk away from the book where Dylan remains still a mysterious figure even after reading this. And I think another thing that surprised people is he writes about history a lot. He has a section on reading von Clausewitz, the military strategist, which is amusing, but kind of giving you some insight into a lot of the historical influences as well that have gone into his songwriting through the years. But and he mentions many different people in this book, people he knew. Some of these are probably made up, fictional figures I think he made up. But there are certain names that recur throughout the book, and so it's I always enjoy reading it, and a lot about religion as well. Dylan is always been religion's always been a preoccupation of his, so there's a lot in here on religion as well, and things like that. So. Yeah. So that was kind of interesting to go back and revisit Chronicles. And I guess the last one, this is a new one I'm taking on, and this is a big one, The Power Broker by Robert Caro. Okay, this is the book Robert Moses and the Fall of New York. This is a big book, a very famous book about Robert Moses, who was a city planner in New York City throughout the mid 20th century, from 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s. And he was one of the most powerful people in the city, probably the most powerful person in the city. Very influential on other city planners, urban planners as well. And yeah, like I said, this is a big book. Caro, in the introduction, immediately sets up the theme that Moses is a tragic figure, where we get a glimpse of Moses in the prologue as a college student at Yale, and he was idealistic. He wanted to do what he could to make the world a better place, especially for less fortunate people. How could he achieve that? And then realizing the only way he could achieve to bring his idealism into fruition would be to achieve power. Okay, so there we have, I think, the great conflict in the book, where all the machinations of gaining power, getting power in order to do idealistic things. Okay, and that's there's a great dichotomy there, and that is how Robert Caro sets it up. So I'm using the audiobook for this one as well, and I've heard really great things about the audio recording, so I'm kind of using that as I'm reading along with it, just to kind of bring the book alive a little bit. I'm not sure now. The audiobook is 66 hours long, so I don't know. You kind of do the math then. Well, if I do an hour a day, this, or 2 hours, I probably won't be doing 2 hours a day. If you did 2 hours a day, you could probably get through it in a month, 30 to 35 days. If you do an hour a day, it'll take a few months. If I do a half hour a day, you might be getting into the holiday season in December by the time I finish it. But anyway, I've had this book a long time, and I just figured the time is now. I really want to dive into it and get through it, and maybe come back with some thoughts as I'm going through the Power Broker, probably its themes of power, and how someone can achieve that much power in the United States in the middle of the 20th century. Okay, what does that say about democracy? What does it say about how our cities have evolved, and how decisions made in the past set up the future? And I think time is such a big theme in the book, where what happened 50 years ago lays the groundwork for what's happening now. So there is, I think, also a real historical consciousness to the book we get from Caro, and also famous for his books on Lyndon Johnson, which I've not read those. I'd like to get to those someday. I think I own the first volume of the LBJ biographies. So yeah, looking forward to the Power Broker. I've never been to New York City, unfortunately, but I'd love to go there someday, and especially after reading this book. And so hopefully this book would give a lot of just history of the city, the key figures in New York City, and the architecture, and just how this massive metropolis evolved. And so it's a great topic, and I think a timely one as well to think about right now. So yeah, I guess that's it for my reading update for today. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments on any thoughts, comments on any of these books, it'd be great to hear them. But thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.